Hello, trading has closed on the 4th of January 2024. We always do our disclaimer first, go over our calls, and then we'll make some predictions. It's my trading plan for tomorrow, which is Friday, January 5. We'll ask you to trade at your own risk because my calls can be wrong. We said that I didn't see much positive in this drop. I said if we were going to have a recovery, we should gap up smartly. That didn't happen. I said if we were going to drop on a beta, we should gap under these lows. Well, we gapped, then we closed the gap. That's not good enough. So based on that, at some point, we should see a retrace. We'll come back to that in a minute. We have an ultimate sell signal in the morning. It sure didn't call the next move, which was higher, but MEJT said that was false, and eventually ultimately we got the lower prices called for by the ultimate sell. This move up was called false, this move down was called false, it retraced, and that's all played out. Once again, here's a reminder of what we said. Tomorrow has the early high. Well, we've broken out of this rising wedge. The low 4500s are my minimum target, but that doesn't mean we have to go there in a straight line. This breakthrough, this trend line wasn't with a gap. I expect at some point we're going to retrace to that trend line. Doesn't have to be tomorrow, but often it is. Doesn't really have to be. We started to knock off all these targets, and I think most of them, the majority, are going to print before the year's out. And the next one on the downside, 46, 45, 13. I've got 12 months to make that prediction good. I suspect we're not going to have to wait the whole 12 months because I think by year end we're going to be higher, but we have a ways to go on the downside first. If you look at this decline, impressive as it is, if you draw a line at that low, you'll see it overlaps with this high. And if you draw a line at this low, see how it overlaps with highs. Overlapping declines are corrective waves. At some point, they retrace. Doesn't mean it can't go lower first. Doesn't mean it can't go much lower first. Well, tomorrow's pattern has the early high, which doesn't tell us where we open. Typically, it's a bearish day with a low in the final hour. If it's strong instead, more strength should follow. Now, the non-farm payroll report comes out before tomorrow's open. I just don't like to make a prediction before a major economic report comes out. I just can't do so with a sufficient level of accuracy. There are plenty of patterns where my accuracy, I think, is pretty good, and there's no reason for me to make a guess when it's not. We broke under the light blue trend line, and the overlapping nature of the decline calls for a retrace at some point. Doesn't mean it happens tomorrow. We have a wall into the close, and often that gaps up. It's not a lot, but if we gap over recent relative highs, we could have a decent rally. I think it would fail at some point. But if there's a wall into the close, you gap over this high and preferably over more than that high, that's going to mean that this break wasn't a valid break. That's the way of rejecting the break, if that gap happens after the economic report. So if you reject this break, you can retrace quite a bit. But of course, at this point, we don't know what's going to be the response to the report. This is quite a drop here, and if we have a negative response to the report, it could just keep on dropping. Now, a friend of mine does have a system for calling market turns based on price and time. I do like to learn from other traders. With his work, we have a direct hit at today's low. So if we gap up strongly, which I'm not predicting one way or the other, he could have a rally which could last all day. His stuff has had some remarkable hits, but it just doesn't hit every time, and I don't see any reason to bet on it at this point. Just if we gap up, I can explain it. So that being said, I can't count the decline as being over. I expect to see much lower lows before this decline ends. So we have much lower targets. There are a number of places where you could justify a recovery. It doesn't mean you're predicting it. It just means if it happens, you could explain it. A positive response tomorrow could lead to a gap up. And if we gap up, we could still have a decent recovery here. But I don't know what the response to the report's going to be. We have much lower targets, and if the response is negative, I wouldn't stand in the way of it because we have much lower to go on the downside before this decline ends. It's a pattern with the early high. Usually it's negative, but if it's positive, we could actually rally for more than just a day. We'll see how we open. That's today's call.